She was a desperate widow who moved to the cabin everyone feared, and heard a sound no human being could forget. Can you imagine being so desperate that you'd choose to live in a place where 7 families had fled in terror? A place where an entire family vanished without a trace? This isn't just a story about survival. It's a story about a mother's courage, ancient secrets hidden in the mountains, and the thin line between our world and something far older. This really happened in the Appalachian Mountains of Tennessee in 1889. Before we continue, go ahead and subscribe to the channel and leave your like, because what this woman discovered in those woods will change the way you think about the forests forever. What she heard in the darkness, what she saw moving between the trees, and how she saved her children from something that had claimed dozens of lives will stay with you long after this story ends. And tell me here in the comments, what state are you watching this story from? I'd love to know how far these emotional stories are reaching. It was September of 1889 when Elizabeth Carter's world finally collapsed completely. She sat in a cramped boarding house room in Knoxville, Tennessee, watching her 3 children sleep on the single small bed they all shared. Mary, her eldest at 14, had her arms wrapped protectively around her younger siblings. Samuel, 11, was curled in the middle, his face still bearing the bruises from the fight he'd gotten into defending his mother's honor when boys at school called her a charity case. And little Ruth, just 7 years old, clutched a worn rag doll, the only toy she had left. Elizabeth, or Eliza as everyone called her, was 38 years old, but she felt ancient. Her husband, James Carter, had died 2 years ago in a mining accident in the Cumberland Mountains. A tunnel collapse. 17 men died that day, 17 families destroyed. James had been a good man, a hard worker, but he'd left debts. So many debts. Equipment he'd bought on credit. Medical bills from when Samuel had pneumonia the winter before. Money borrowed from the mining company itself. After James died, Eliza tried everything. She took in laundry, did mending, cleaned houses, but it wasn't enough. Never enough. The debts kept mounting, and 6 months ago she lost their small house. Everything they owned was sold to pay creditors. For the past half year, they'd been living on charity, moving from one temporary room to another, one step away from the poorhouse, and now Eliza had run out of options. The boarding house owner had given her until the end of the week to pay rent or leave. She had $3 to her name, and she'd heard the whispers, seen the looks. People were talking, saying her children should go to the orphanage, that she was unfit, unable to provide. The thought of her babies being taken away, separated, sent to institutions where they'd be worked like slaves and forgotten, made Eliza physically ill. She'd spent the entire day walking the streets of Knoxville, begging for work, any work. Every door closed in her face. And now, as the sun set and her children slept, she sat by the window and did something she hadn't done in months. She prayed, not for wealth or comfort, just for a chance, any chance to keep her family together. The next morning, something impossible happened. A message came for her at the boarding house. A lawyer named Cornelius Webb wanted to see her. Eliza had no idea why a lawyer would want to speak with her, but she put on her cleanest dress, the one she'd been saving for job interviews, and walked to his office. Cornelius Webb was an elderly man with white hair and kind, tired eyes. His office was filled with books and smelled of pipe tobacco and old paper. He gestured for Eliza to sit. "Mrs. Carter, I understand you're in difficult circumstances," he said gently. Eliza's cheeks burned with shame, but she nodded. "Yes, sir. I am. I have a proposition for you. It's unusual, and I must be completely honest. It may not be what you hope, but it is an opportunity." Eliza leaned forward. "I'm listening." "I manage several properties in East Tennessee. One of them is a cabin in the Smoky Mountains about 15 miles from here. It's a good-sized cabin, 2 stories with land, a well, a barn, enough room for a family." Eliza's heart began to race. "Sir, I have no money to pay rent." "There would be no rent," Webb interrupted. "The cabin is yours to live in, free of charge for as long as you wish. All I ask is that you maintain it and the property." It sounded too good to be true. Why would you offer this?" Webb sighed deeply. He stood and walked to his window, looking out at the street. "Because, Mrs. Carter, no one else will take it. That cabin has been empty for 15 years. In that time, 7 families have tried to live there. None lasted more than 3 months. Most left within weeks." "Why?" Eliza asked, though she already felt a cold dread creeping into her stomach. "They say it's haunted, cursed. The original family that built it, the Mercers, disappeared without a trace in 1874, vanished in the night. And since then, every family that's tried to live there has fled in terror. They report strange sounds from the forest, a compulsion to walk into the woods at night. Visions, nightmares. He turned to face her. "I don't know if I believe in such things, Mrs. Carter, but I do know that something about that place frightens people. Deeply." Eliza's mind raced. A cabin, land, a home for her children. But at what cost? "What do you believe, Mr. Webb?" "Honestly." The old lawyer was quiet for a long moment. "I believe there are old places in these mountains, places that were here long before we came. And I believe that sometimes in our arrogance we build where we shouldn't. That cabin sits on the edge of a very old forest. The Cherokee who lived in these mountains for thousands of years avoided that area, called it forbidden ground. But white settlers don't listen to such warnings. The Mercers didn't listen, and they paid a terrible price. Did you ever search for them? The Mercers? Of course. Everyone did. We found the cabin exactly as they'd left it. Food on the table, beds unmade, clothes in the wardrobes. But the family was gone. We found tracks leading from the house into the forest, but about 50 yards in, the tracks just stopped, as if the people had been lifted off the ground. We searched for weeks, never found a trace of them. Eliza felt her mouth go dry. "And you're offering this place to me?" "I'm offering you a choice, Mrs. Carter. The cabin is habitable, structurally sound. The land is fertile. You could have a garden, raise chickens, perhaps a few goats. You could be self-sufficient there. But you need to know the risks. I won't lie to you. Something about that place is wrong. But it's a home, and you need one." He walked to his desk and pulled out a key. "Think about it. You have until Friday. If you decide to take it, the cabin is yours. No rent, no lease. I'll even provide you with basic supplies to get started, seed for planting, some livestock. It's the least I can do." Eliza took the key with trembling hands. A haunted cabin or the orphanage. The choice was no choice at all. That night, she told her children. Mary's face went pale. "Mother, if it's haunted, it's probably just stories, sweetheart. Old mountain superstition. People get scared in isolated places. Their imaginations run wild." But Samuel's eyes were wide. "A whole family disappeared? Where did they go?" "No one knows, Samuel. But that was 15 years ago. Whatever happened then, it's over now." Little Ruth tugged on Eliza's sleeve. "Will we have our own rooms?" Eliza's eyes filled with tears. "Yes, darling. You'll have your own room, a real home." On Friday morning, Eliza returned to Mr. Webb's office and accepted the offer. He provided a wagon, a horse, bags of flour and beans, seed packets, 2 chickens in a crate, and directions to the cabin. "God be with you, Mrs. Carter," he said, as she prepared to leave. "And if it becomes too much, if you feel unsafe, come back. I'll help you find something else. Promise me you won't stay if it's dangerous." "I promise," Eliza said, though she knew it was a lie. She had nowhere else to go. The journey took most of the day. They traveled on rough mountain roads, climbing higher and higher into the Smokies. The landscape was beautiful but intimidating. Dense forests of oak and hickory, mountains that seemed to go on forever, valleys filled with mist. They saw a few other people, a farmer here, a trapper there. The higher they climbed, the more isolated they became. Finally, as the sun began to set, they rounded a bend and saw it. The cabin. It stood in a clearing surrounded on 3 sides by forest. The trees behind it were particularly dense, old-growth forest with massive trunks and thick canopy that blocked out most of the light. The cabin itself was larger than Eliza had expected, built of dark oak logs, 2 stories tall with a stone chimney and a wide front porch. There was a barn, weathered but standing, and the remains of a garden, now overgrown. But there was something off about the place. Something Eliza couldn't quite name. The clearing felt too quiet. Even the birds seemed reluctant to come close. "It's big," Mary said quietly, trying to sound positive. "Plenty of room for all of us," Eliza agreed. They unloaded the wagon and approached the cabin. The front door was unlocked. It swung open with a loud creak that made them all jump. Inside, the cabin was dusty but, as Mr. Webb had promised, structurally sound. The main floor had a large common room with a fireplace, a kitchen area, and a small bedroom. Upstairs were 3 more bedrooms. Furniture remained from previous occupants covered in dust sheets. "Why would people leave furniture behind?" Samuel asked. "Maybe they were in a hurry. Eliza said, trying to keep her voice light. Or maybe they had new furniture where they went next. But as they explored, Eliza saw things that disturbed her. Deep scratches on the inside of the front door, as if someone had clawed at it trying to get out, or keep something from getting in. A window in the upstairs hallway was shattered, the glass on the outside, as if someone had broken it from inside trying to escape. And when they went to the barn, they found messages carved into the wooden walls. Don't stay after dark. The trees watch. It calls in the night. Keep the children inside. And most disturbing, we should have listened. Eliza quickly ushered her children out of the barn. Just foolish pranks, she said. Someone trying to scare people away. Pay it no mind. But Mary had seen her mother's face. She knew Eliza was afraid, that first evening. They cleaned the cabin as best they could, made beds with the linens Mr. Webb had provided, and Eliza cooked a simple dinner of beans and cornbread on the old wood stove. They ate by candlelight, the setting sun casting long shadows through the windows. We'll make this work, Eliza said, looking at each of her children. We'll plant a garden in the spring. Tend the chickens. Maybe in time we can get a cow. This is our fresh start, our second chance. Ruth smiled, the first real smile Eliza had seen on her daughter's face in months. I like it here, Mama. It's quiet. Yes, Eliza said. It's very quiet. Too quiet, she thought, but didn't say. After dinner, exhausted from the journey and the work of settling in, they all went to bed early. Eliza put Ruth in the smallest upstairs bedroom, gave Mary the medium one, and Samuel took the large one at the end of the hall. She took the downstairs bedroom, wanting to be on the ground floor in case... In case of what? She didn't know. Just in case. Eliza lay in the unfamiliar bed, listening to the old house settle and creak. Outside, the wind moved through the trees, making them sway and whisper. It was peaceful. For the first time in 2 years, she felt a small measure of hope. Maybe this would work. Maybe they could be happy here. She was just drifting off to sleep when she heard it. A sound from outside. From the forest. It started low, almost below the range of hearing. A hum. Then it grew, rising in pitch and volume. It wasn't an animal sound, at least not like any animal Eliza had ever heard. It was musical, almost beautiful, a long melodic call that seemed to echo through the trees, but there was something wrong with it. Something that made Eliza's skin crawl and her heart race with instinctive fear. The sound seemed to bypass her ears and go directly into her mind, pulling at something deep inside her. Come, the sound seemed to say. Come outside. Come to the trees. Eliza sat up in bed, her whole body trembling. The sound continued for perhaps 30 seconds, then faded away. Silence. Eliza rushed upstairs to check on her children. Samuel and Ruth were asleep, though Ruth was whimpering in her sleep. But Mary was awake, sitting up in bed, her eyes wide with terror. Mama, what was that? I don't know, sweetheart. It was calling us. I felt it. It wanted us to go outside. Eliza sat on the bed and held her daughter. It's probably just a strange bird. Or the wind playing tricks in the mountains. You're safe. I won't let anything hurt you. But as she said the words, she wondered if they were true. The next morning, Eliza told herself it had been nothing. First night nerves in a strange place. Mountains were full of unusual sounds. Wind through caves, echoes off rock faces, animals you didn't have in cities. She kept busy, organizing the cabin, setting up their meager belongings, exploring the property in daylight. The land was good. The well water was clear and cold. The barn needed repairs, but it was usable. The old garden plot was overgrown, but had good soil. She could make this work. In the afternoon, she walked into the forest a short distance, gathering fallen branches for kindling. The woods were dense and dark, even in daylight. The trees were enormous. Some of them had to be hundreds of years old. The undergrowth was thick with ferns and moss. But as Eliza walked deeper, she began to feel uneasy. The forest was too quiet. No bird calls, no rustling of small animals. Just silence. And she had the distinct, unsettling feeling that she was being watched. She turned to head back to the cabin and stopped. On the ground in front of her was a track. A footprint, if you could call it that. It was large, at least 18 inches long, pressed deep into the soft earth. It had 3 long, splayed toes, each ending in what looked like a claw mark. Eliza's blood ran cold. She looked around wildly, suddenly acutely aware of how alone she was. How vulnerable. She ran back to the cabin, not stopping until she was inside with the door locked behind her. That night the sound came again. This time it was louder, longer, more insistent. And this time all three children heard it clearly. Samuel came downstairs, his face pale. "Mama, something's calling us." "I want to go outside." "I need to go outside." "No," Eliza said firmly, though her own legs felt weak with the compulsion. "No one goes outside after dark." "Do you hear me?" "No one." Ruth appeared at the bottom of the stairs. Her eyes were open, but she wasn't awake. She was sleepwalking. She moved toward the front door, her arms outstretched, her face blank. "Ruth!" Eliza grabbed her daughter before she could reach the door. Ruth struggled against her, still asleep, making small whimpering sounds. "Need to go. Need to go outside. He's calling. He wants us." Eliza carried Ruth back to bed, but the little girl fought her the whole way, trying to escape, trying to return to the door. It took Mary holding her down while Eliza sang lullabies before Ruth finally fell back into normal sleep. "This isn't natural," Mary whispered. "Mama, there's something wrong here. We need to leave." "We can't," Eliza said, and she hated how desperate she sounded. "Mary, we have nowhere else to go. We have to make this work, even if it kills us." Mary's eyes filled with tears. "What if we end up like the Mercer family? What if we just disappear?" Eliza had no answer. Over the next week, the phenomena escalated. The sound came every night, always in the hours between midnight and dawn. And it was different each time. Sometimes it was that melodic call. Other times it was more urgent, almost angry. Once it sounded like words, though in no language Eliza recognized. During the day, Eliza found evidence that something was coming close to the cabin at night. Strange tracks around the property. Handprints, if you could call them that, pressed into the mud near the well. But the prints were wrong. Too large, too many fingers. Branches broken high up in the trees near the cabin, 10 or 12 feet off the ground, as if something tall had passed through, and the children were suffering. Samuel had nightmares every night, waking up screaming that something was trying to drag him into the forest. Mary barely slept, too afraid to close her eyes, and Ruth continued to sleepwalk, always trying to get outside, always moving toward the forest. Eliza had to lock the doors and hide the keys to keep her daughter inside. Finally, Eliza knew she needed help. She needed answers. She loaded her children into the wagon, locked up the cabin, and drove 12 miles to the nearest town, a small settlement called Cades Cove. The town was tiny, just a general store, a church, a blacksmith, and a handful of houses. But it was civilization, and Eliza desperately needed to talk to someone who might understand what was happening. At the general store, she bought basic supplies and tried to engage the shopkeeper, a weathered man named Henry, in conversation. "We've just moved into the old Mercer cabin," she said, watching his face. Henry's expression immediately closed off. "Have you now?" "Yes, we're fixing it up." "Making it home?" "It's a good property. You should leave," Henry said bluntly. "Pack up and get out before something happens." "What might happen?" "Please, I need to understand." "You need to leave," Henry repeated, and he wouldn't say another word. Frustrated, Eliza tried the church. The minister, Reverend Thomas, was more willing to talk, but he was clearly uncomfortable. "Mrs. Carter, I don't traffic in superstition and old wives' tales. But I will say this. That part of the mountain has a bad history. Long before the Mercers, long before any white settlers came here, the Cherokee avoided that area. And the Mercers," he trailed off. "Please, Reverend, tell me what you know. I was here when they disappeared. I helped search. What we found, or didn't find, it wasn't natural, Mrs. Carter. Tracks that stopped mid-stride. No blood, no signs of struggle, but a family of 6 just gone. And in the 15 years since, everyone who's tried to live there has reported the same things. Sounds from the forest. A compulsion to go into the woods at night. Some have seen things. Figures moving between the trees. Tall figures. Not quite human. What do you think they are?" Eliza asked, her voice barely a whisper. "I think there are things in God's creation that we don't understand," Reverend Thomas said carefully. "Things that were here before us and will be here after we're gone. And I think some of those things don't want us in their territory. Where can I learn more?" "There must be someone who knows the history of this place." The Reverend hesitated. "There's an old Cherokee man who lives up in the high mountains, named Sequoia, though I doubt that's his real name. He's been here longer than anyone. Keeps to himself mostly, but he knows these mountains better than anyone alive. If you want truth, he might have it. Where can I find him? About 8 miles north of your cabin, there's a trail that leads up to a waterfall. Follow the stream above the falls another mile. He has a cabin there, but Mrs. Carter, I must warn you. He's not always welcoming to whites, and even if he talks to you, you might not like what he has to say. Eliza thanked the Reverend and left. That evening, she fed her children and put them to bed early. She sat by the fire thinking, tomorrow she would find this sequoia. She would get answers, and then she would decide whether to stay or go. That night the sound came again, but this time it was accompanied by something new. Footsteps, heavy footsteps circling the cabin, slow and deliberate. Eliza peered out the window but could see nothing in the darkness. The footsteps continued for what felt like hours, moving around and around the cabin. Then they stopped. Right outside the front door. Silence. Eliza held her breath, her heart hammering. Then, slowly, the door handle began to turn. Eliza had locked it, thank God, but the handle turned all the way to the right, then back to the left, as if something was testing it. After a moment, there was a scratching sound. Long, slow scrapes down the wooden door. 1, 2, 3, like something dragging claws down the wood. Then nothing. Silence. The footsteps retreated back into the forest. In the morning, Eliza found deep gouges in her front door. 3 parallel lines, made by something with claws or talons, something strong enough to carve through oak. That morning, leaving her children locked inside the cabin with strict instructions not to open the door for anyone but her, Eliza set out to find Sequoia. She followed the Reverend's directions, finding the trail, the waterfall, and finally, after an exhausting climb, a small cabin built into the side of the mountain. Smoke rose from the chimney. Someone was home. Eliza knocked on the door, and after a long moment, it opened. The man who answered was ancient, his face deeply lined, his long hair pure white. But his eyes were sharp and clear, and they studied Eliza with an intensity that made her want to look away. "I know why you're here," he said in perfect English. "You live in the cursed cabin, and you want to know what hunts in the forest." "Yes," Eliza said, "please. My children are in danger." Sequoia stared at her for a long moment, then stepped aside. "Come in. It's time someone understood the truth." Inside the small cabin, they sat on simple wooden chairs. Sequoia poured them both tea made from mountain herbs. He was silent for so long that Eliza thought he might not speak. But finally, he began. "My people have lived in these mountains for thousands of years. We knew every valley, every stream, every cave. We knew which places were safe and which were forbidden. That forest where your cabin sits, it is one of the forbidden places. We have a name for it in my language. It translates roughly to where the old ones walk." "What are the old ones?" Eliza asked. "Things that were here before humans, before my people, before yours, before any man walked this land. They lived in the deep forests, in the places humans had not yet touched. When my people came, we learned quickly to avoid certain areas, because in those places people disappeared. Hunters would go in and never come out. Children who wandered too far into the forest would be found days later with no memory of where they'd been. Or they wouldn't be found at all. Are they spirits? No. They are physical, as real as you or I. But they are not human. They are tall, perhaps 7 or 8 feet. Thin but strong. They move through the forest without sound. And they have a gift, or perhaps a curse. They can call. Their voice enters your mind and pulls you to them. You cannot resist. You must go." Eliza felt sick. "What do they want?" "To take. To collect." "We don't know why. Perhaps they are lonely. Perhaps they are protecting their territory. Perhaps they simply do not understand that we are thinking, feeling beings and see us as we might see cattle. My people learned long ago to mark the boundaries of their territory and never cross them. We made offerings at the edges, showed respect, and in return, they left our villages alone. But someone built a cabin in their territory. Yes, the white men who settled here didn't listen to our warnings. Didn't believe. They thought we were primitive, superstitious. The Mercers built their cabin right on the edge of the Old Ones' forest. And the Old Ones came for them. The whole family taken in one night. Why didn't they take the other families who lived there after? They tried. But those families left quickly. Felt the wrongness. Heard the calls and fled. But your family, you're still there. You've stayed longer than most. And that has caught their attention. They are testing you now. Calling harder, coming closer. Soon they will try to take one of you. Probably the children. Children are easier to call. Eliza's hands were shaking. How do I stop them? How do I protect my family? You leave. That is the only way to be truly safe. I can't. I have nowhere else to go. Sequoia studied her face. Then you must defend your territory as we did. Mark your boundaries. Show that you respect theirs but will not surrender yours. And use what they fear. What do they fear? Fire. The old ones are creatures of the deep forest where fire does not easily spread, where everything is damp and dark. They fear flames. If you create a barrier of fire between your cabin and the forest, they cannot cross. It burns them, yes, but more than that, it disturbs them on a level beyond physical pain. Fire is chaos. Fire is destruction. Fire is human. They will not approach it. Eliza leaned forward. How do I create this barrier? A ring of torches around your home. Keep them lit every night. It will be hard work. You'll need much wood, much oil, but it will keep them back. And in time, if you show them you will not leave but also will not encroach on their territory, they may come to accept your presence. It happened with my people, over generations. It can happen again. Is there anything else I should know? Sequoia was quiet for a long moment. There is a place deeper in the forest, a cave. Inside are paintings made by my ancestors thousands of years ago. They tell the story of the first contact between humans and the old ones. If you wish to truly understand, I will take you there. But it will be dangerous. The cave is in their territory. Show me, Eliza said. I need to understand what I'm facing. They left immediately, walking deep into the forest, higher up the mountain. Sequoia moved with surprising speed for his age, and Eliza struggled to keep up. The forest around them grew darker, older. The trees here were massive, their trunks wider than wagons, their canopies blocking out the sun. After an hour of hiking, they reached a cliff face. At its base was a dark opening, a cave mouth. Sequoia lit a torch and led the way inside. The cave was deep, cool, and smelled of earth and stone. On the walls were paintings, faded but still visible. Ochre reds, charcoal blacks, clay whites. The images told a story. Humans, small figures, living in a valley. Then from the forest, tall figures emerged. In the paintings, they were represented as elongated forms with two long limbs and large round eyes. The tall figures took humans, led them into the forest. More paintings showed humans fighting back, fires burning. And finally a boundary, humans on one side, the tall figures on the other, a truce. This was 3,000 years ago, Sequoia said, his voice echoing in the cave. The first agreement, we stay out of the deep forest, they stay out of our camps. It held for millennia, until your people came and did not know, did not listen. Eliza touched the ancient paintings, feeling the weight of history. Thank you for showing me this, for trusting me with this knowledge. I show you because you have children to protect, because I see in you what I saw in my own grandmother, who also faced the old ones when they came too close to our village. She was fierce, unafraid. She stood between them and her family and refused to move, and they respected her for it. Eventually, what happened to her? She lived to be 97 years old, raised 6 children, 32 grandchildren, and she never entered the deep forest again, but she also never left her home. She stood her ground, as you must do. That evening, Eliza returned to the cabin. Her children were safe, huddled together in the main room, clearly terrified but unharmed. Mary had kept them inside all day, doors and windows locked. Eliza gathered her children and told them the truth. All of it, what Sequoia had told her, what was in the forest, what had taken the Mercer family. We're going to protect ourselves, she said firmly. We're going to create a fire barrier around the cabin. We'll gather wood, make torches, and every night we'll light them. It's going to be hard work, but we can do it. We can keep ourselves safe. Why don't we just leave? Mary asked, tears streaming down her face. Because, my darling, we have nowhere to go. This is our home now, and we're going to defend it. Over the next 3 days, they worked from dawn to dusk. They gathered fallen wood from the edge of the forest, cut it into manageable pieces. Eliza fashioned crude torches by wrapping cloth around sticks and soaking them in lamp oil. They created stands to hold the torches, planting them in the ground in a wide circle around the cabin, about 20 feet out from the walls. By the end of the 3rd day, they had 30 torches positioned around the entire cabin. That night, as darkness fell, Eliza lit them all. The torches flared to life, creating a ring of fire and light around their home. The effect was immediate. The usual sounds from the forest, the rustling and creaking that had become normal, stopped. The silence was absolute. Eliza stood in the center of the ring, her children beside her, and waited. They came at midnight. Through the smoke and shadows, Eliza saw them. Figures moving between the trees. Tall, impossibly tall, with elongated limbs that seemed to bend in too many places. Their bodies were thin, almost skeletal, covered in something that looked like bark or rough hide. And their eyes reflected the firelight, glowing a pale green in the darkness. There were at least 6 of them, maybe more. They moved to the edge of the fire ring and stopped, watching, waiting. One of them moved closer, testing. As it approached the flames, it made a sound, a low hiss of pain or discomfort, and jerked back. Another tried with the same result. They could not cross the fire. For hours the creatures circled the cabin, always staying just beyond the flames. Occasionally one would reach out a long, thin arm, fingers tipped with what looked like claws, testing the air near the fire. But they did not cross. And slowly as dawn approached, they retreated back into the forest, disappeared into the shadows between the trees. Eliza and her children had stayed awake all night, huddled together, watching. As the sun rose and the creatures were gone, they finally allowed themselves to breathe. "We did it," Samuel whispered. "We kept them out. For now," Eliza said. "But we'll need to keep the fires burning every night. We can't let our guard down." And so began their new routine. Every evening before sunset they would light the torches. Every morning they would extinguish them and gather more wood for the next night. It was exhausting work, but it kept them safe. A week passed, then 2. The creatures came every night, but they no longer approached as close. They stayed at the tree line, watching from a distance. And slowly they came less frequently. 3 nights a week, then 2. Then occasionally, Sequoia visited after a month. He examined their fire ring and nodded approvingly. "Good. You've shown them you will defend your territory." "They're beginning to understand. Will they ever stop coming entirely?" Eliza asked. "Perhaps in time. My people lived near their territory for generations. Eventually, the old ones came to ignore us, as long as we respected the boundaries. It may be the same for you." Eliza also began to make offerings, as Sequoia suggested. She would leave food at the edge of the forest, not inside the tree line, but at the boundary. Corn, bread, once a chicken. The food was always gone by morning. "It's a sign of respect," Sequoia explained. "You're acknowledging that this land was theirs first, that you share it with them. They will appreciate this gesture, in their way." Slowly, life began to normalize. The children slept better, though they never slept deeply. Mary started teaching Ruth and Samuel from old books Eliza had saved. Eliza planted a garden, tended the chickens, and began making preserves from wild berries to sell in town. The first time she returned to Cades Cove with jars of blackberry jam, people stared. The shopkeeper, Henry, looked at her as if she were a ghost. "You're still alive," he said, not unkindly. "Just surprised. Yes, we're making it work." "How?" "Everyone else who lived there fled, or—" He trailed off. "We learned to respect what's in the forest, and to defend what's ours." Word spread. The widow who'd tamed the cursed cabin, the woman who'd faced the things in the forest and survived. People whispered, but they also began to respect her. And when other people in desperate situations came to town, people like her had once been homeless and hopeless. Eliza began offering them shelter. "You can stay with us for a while," she said to them, her voice kind but firm. "It's safe here, as long as you respect the boundaries, as long as you keep the fires lit." And so the cabin that everyone had feared became a sanctuary, a place of last resort, a place where the desperate and the broken could find safety, guarded by a ring of fire and the courage of a woman who refused to back down. Eliza, with Sequoia's guidance, performed a ceremony at the edge of the woods. It wasn't a ceremony of worship, but one of acknowledgement. She left offerings of tobacco and sweetgrass. She marked the boundary line clearly with stones painted white. It was a promise spoken aloud to the ancient trees. "We will not enter your lands. We ask only that you respect ours." And in return, a new peace settled over the clearing. The creatures still came, but they were distant. Shadows at the edge of the firelight. Their calls, when they sounded, were no longer insistent pulls, but echoes. Melancholy and far away, like the memory of a song. Life took on a new rhythm. Mornings were for the garden, which flourished under Eliza's care. Afternoons were for preserving. Jars of beans, tomatoes, berries, and jams lined the shelves of her pantry. Samuel, showing a natural talent with his hands, repaired the barn and began building sturdy furniture. Mary took charge of the growing household, teaching not only her siblings but the children of the other women who found shelter there. The town of Cades Cove, which had once shunned her, now greeted her with a quiet awe. They called her the Widow of the Woods or the Fire Woman. They bought her preserves, traded her for goods they couldn't make. They saw the strength in her, and in the small, thriving community she was building in the shadow of the forbidden forest. Years began to pass, marked by the changing of the Appalachian seasons. The harsh winters, where the fire rings burned brightest against the snow. The vibrant springs, when the forest seemed to come alive with a green so deep it hurt the eyes. The children grew. 10 years went by. The cabin was no longer just a cabin. It was a homestead. Samuel had built 2 smaller cabins in the clearing, expanding their refuge. Mary, now 24, married a kind blacksmith from Cades Cove, a man brave enough to come courting at the cabin with the strange reputation. Eliza watched her daughter leave, her heart full of pride and sorrow. Samuel, at 21, was a master carpenter, his work sought after throughout the county. He stayed at the homestead, his strength a pillar for Eliza and the women who depended on them. And Ruth, little Ruth, who had once been so susceptible to the call, was now 17. She had grown up with the sounds of the forest, with the nightly ritual of the fire. She was strong, sharp, and fearless. She knew the woods better than anyone, walking the boundary line every day, her respect for the forest matched only by her fierce protection of her home. Eliza herself was now 48. Her hair was streaked with gray, her hands rough from a decade of hard work. But her eyes were clear and steady. One cool autumn evening, Eliza sat on the front porch, wrapped in a quilt, watching the mist settle in the valley below. The ring of fire, now a permanent circle of stone fire pits, tended by Samuel and Ruth, burned brightly. She looked out at the dark wall of trees, the ancient forest that had once been her greatest terror. And as if summoned by her thoughts, she heard it. Faint, so faint it was almost carried away by the wind. The sound, that long, melodic, impossible call, it didn't pull at her mind anymore. It didn't frighten her. It was just there, a reminder that the world was far older and stranger than most people knew, that there were things that walked in the darkness, things that lived just beyond the veil of what we understood, and that survival wasn't always about defeating them. Sometimes it was about finding a way to coexist, about showing respect, about holding your ground, lighting your own fire, and refusing to be consumed by the dark. In town, the stories of the Mercer cabin had changed. They were no longer just ghost stories. They were legends. They whispered about the widow who had faced the old ones, the Nonehi, as Sequoia sometimes called them, and had earned their respect. And when families found themselves in desperate straits, when a woman was left alone with no one to turn to, when the world seemed to have no place for them, the people of Cades Cove would point. They'd point up toward the high peaks, toward the place where the mist clung to the trees. Go see the widow, they'd say. Go to the cabin on the mountain. The one guarded by fire. She'll take you in. You'll be safe there. And they were, because Elizabeth Carter, the desperate widow who had chosen the haunted cabin over the orphanage, had done more than just survive. She had built a home. She had made the impossible, the terrifying, the place everyone feared, into a beacon of hope. And so ends the story of Eliza Carter, the widow who moved to the cabin that everyone feared and faced what lived in the forest. The forest held an ancient secret, a broken pact, and the creatures that lived there were feared by all. But Eliza, with a courage fueled by a mother's love, didn't run. She used fire and respect to turn a place of terror into a home. And you? What would you do if you had to choose between a cursed place and losing your family? Would you have Eliza's courage? Tell me here in the comments. Your opinion is very important to me. If you like this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, activate the notification bell, and leave your like. There's a new story here every week, and don't go just yet. Click on the next recommended video that appears on your screen now. There's another emotional story waiting for you. Until next time.